Hello and welcome back. In this lecture we're going to begin a new unit on the nervous system, and this particular lecture will be on the nervous tissue. And I want you to think that your nervous system is everything. This is a really critical system to know and to learn, and we're going to spend the rest of our time this semester talking about it. Nothing shows us better how the nervous system is everything than a rabid animal biting a human being. When a rabid animal bites a human being, a virus called the rabies virus is in the saliva of the animal, and that virus travels from the saliva of the animal through the person's body up into the nervous system, and eventually gets into the brain and affects the brain and shuts down all functioning of the brain, eventually killing the human. This virus is almost a bullet-shaped like size virus. These things are very small, very dangerous though. This is what the virus looks like. So it's a pretty complex virus. It has a protein coat on the outside. It has it's a virus that uses RNA as its genetic material, and when it gets into the human body, it travels on up the nervous system and will affect all areas of the nervous system, because the brain controls everything, and full-blown rabies will result from that. You want to be careful. There are many different kinds of animals in Virginia that can carry rabies. So we have the opossum, the skunk, the raccoon, of course, cats, all different kinds of cats, and the fox and bats. So you want to be very careful. Rabies can be in just about every animal, horses and other kinds of creatures that are domesticated. So if you ever see something dead on the road, be careful. If you ever see something acting funny in your yard, make sure you don't go out and get bit by the rabid animal. Rabies, if you catch it early, you can get a vaccine for it. But if it spreads into your nervous system, there's really no cure for it. So the nervous system is going to be divided into the central nervous system, and this is going to be making up your brain and spinal cord, and then we have another system called the peripheral nervous system. So for the rest of the semester, we'll be talking about the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous systems. So all of these systems are made of nerve tissue, which is kind of like the main thrust of our lecture for today. So the peripheral nervous system is also further subdivided into the somatic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is going to be dealing with things like glands, skin glands, and skeletal muscle tissue. It also sends information to the brain through sensory nerves, and so your special nerves like eyes, ears, taste, and those things are going to be sent to the brain through the somatic nervous system. The somatic nervous system also has motor neurons that go from the central nervous system to the somatic nervous system to control things like glands and skeletal muscle tissue. It's some skin glands. So the autonomic nervous system is going to be your automatic nervous system, and there's all kinds of receptors all throughout your body that send information to the brain about what's going on inside your body. And motor neurons come through the autonomic nervous system to control smooth muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, and other glands of the body. And then we have a whole other nervous system, part of the peripheral nervous system, called the enteric nervous system, and this is going to be found in your gut. And there are enteric motor neurons that are going to control smooth muscle tissue, glands, and things like the endocrine cells in the GI tract. And then we have sensory cells that will send information to the central nervous system as part of this enteric nervous system. So each of these somatic, autonomic, and enteric nervous systems, we'll talk about these, and we'll definitely spend a lot of time talking about the central nervous system. Well, all of these nervous systems have neurological tissue. They have nervous tissue. And neurological tissue is a very complex tissue, as you're going to see through the course of this particular lecture. There are neurons that are part of the nervous tissue, and these are very special cells. They have the ability to conduct nerve impulses. They have the ability to process information and then dictate or direct different body parts to do different jobs. As part of nervous tissue, we also have neuroglial cells. These are supporting neurons that support all the jobs or functions of the neurons. And if you look at nervous tissue down here, you can see that this gigantic cell that I'm kind of outlining here for you that has dendrites and axons in a cell body, that is what we call a neuron. And those are the workhorses of the nervous tissue. But, you know, in maybe a 10 to 1 or a higher ratio, each of these nuclei here are nuclei of neuroglial cells that are aiding the neuron in doing its particular job. So when you look at nerve tissue, it's not just nerve cells, but it's also the neuroglial cells that are supporting the neurons so that they can do the job that they need to do. Neuroglial is kind of a weird word, but neuro refers to nerve, glia refers to glue, and these definitely help to give structural framework and I guess in quotation marks glue the nerve cells together and bind them together. This is an artist's rendition showing the nervous tissue, and you can see there's different kinds of cells that are these neuroglial cells. So in this picture you only have one neuron, but that one neuron is supported by microglial cells, it's supported by ependymal cells, it's supported by astrocytes, and it's supported by oligodendrocytes. Each of these cells does a particular function to aid the neuron, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. So, you know, early on, you know, when we started having microscopes, we started looking through slices of tissues, and our ability to see things under the microscope got better and better as we began to make better and better stains. You can see that this does not look like the picture that you just saw, but this is nervous tissue here. In this nervous tissue, there are neurons and neuroglial cells. So over time, as scientists started studying nerve tissue, they got better and better at figuring out how to stain and how to isolate and look at the true nature of what this tissue was made of. These are some very early pictures of nerve cells. You can see that nerve cells can be very, very complex, having many extensions. You know, these are all what we call dendrites up here. These are dendrites. So these have extensive extensions and extensive interconnectivity. And so some scientists took this tissue and were able to isolate nerve cells so we could understand the true nature of what they actually look like. So there's beautiful pictures that were drawn in the past of what nerve tissue looked like, and these are painstakingly drawn, you know, from looking under a microscope. Well, as our technology got better, we were able to take electron micrograph pictures. So we use electron microscopes to take pictures. So you can see the body of a neuron right here. This is a false colored electron micrograph. All electron micrographs are going to be black and white, but this one they put colors in so you can begin to see neurons, and then you can see various supporting cells and processes around the neurons. This is a truly magnificent picture of a motor neuron coming down. We have the neuromuscular junction here that we just talked about in the nervous system, and you can see the muscle fiber here. So we can see very intricate pictures of this neuromuscular junction and these motor neurons coming down. We can take and look at the neuromuscular junction, and we can see through transmission electron microscopy, you can see all the synaptic vesicles. So all of these little round circles are synaptic vesicles. You can see the postsynaptic membrane, the presynaptic membrane. You can see the synapse or space in between the cells. So we have very intricate pictures of these cells and structures. This is a beautiful light micrograph picture showing you a motor unit where you have a motor neuron coming down, and each of these would be a neuromuscular junction contacting each of these different cells. Well, just recently we have discovered that there are pigments inside of things like jellyfish that will phosphoresce. They'll actually glow under certain kinds of light. This particular protein is called a green fluorescent protein, GFP. And we have the ability to take GFP, isolate it, and then insert it into other organisms. And so you can see here we can take and insert GFP into up there in the upper left-hand corner monkeys. We have rabbits, rats, and cats, and under the right kind of light, the protein will fluoresce. And you might think, well, why in the world would we want to do that? Well, you can take GFP, if you can insert it into these organisms, you can also insert it into various aspects of the nervous system. So here we've taken one cell and we've isolated it. We've inserted GFP in it, and under the right kind of light, under a microscope, it allows you to visualize all the different various aspects of that particular cell. So here they've taken GFP and they've inserted it into nervous tissue, so you can see how the nerve cells are arranged. What's cool is that in nature there's all different kinds of these other kinds of proteins. There are blue staining GFP-like proteins. There are red staining, pink staining, yellow staining, and through different techniques of biotechnology, we can take and insert all of these different colors into the nervous tissue. So we have taken and inserted these proteins into fish, so we can have all different kinds of colored fish. But the greatest use of this, in my opinion, is not colorful aquarium fish, but rather having the ability to insert them into nerve tissue so you can begin to see the complexity of how these cells are arranged with each other. Look at all these beautiful cells. Each of these were inserted a different color, so you can begin to see how these things network with each other and how they're organized. What makes this very significant is that if you can take and look at normal nerve tissue, then when you look at damaged nerve tissue, it gives you a visualization to allow you to understand the processes that are working in abnormal tissues. Here's just the different kinds of GFP proteins that are used to look at different kinds of packed neurons. So we can look at individual, neuromuscular junctions with different kinds of junctions coming in, with different cells innervating different cells. So each of these would be, let me change my color pen here. So each of these would be a junction here, and you can literally visualize how those cells are causing those junctions to occur. So just another picture showing you the application. You can begin to see how these things are interconnected with each other. So you can see the axons and the dendrites in their natural location. Just beautiful photography that can be done with this. This is showing you a cut through a nerve, allowing you to see all the different axons from different nerve cells. So when we look at a nerve, nerves have lots of these little projections coming out of nerve cells called axons, and you can see each individual one by using this staining technique. Not a staining technique, but in engineering it with inserting the protein into these axons. Okay, well, let's get into the crux of what we want to talk about for this lecture. So we want to talk about neurons. Neurons are excitatory cells. They have the ability to change their voltage on the interior of their cells so they can get excited and they can transmit a chemoelectrical signal down the length of their bodies and down the length of their axons and communicate with other cells. So they're very special cells in having the ability to be excitatory. So there are different types of neurons. You probably have had this at some point in your educational career. There are sensory neurons. Sensory neurons are going to collect and send information to the brain and spinal cord about what's going on inside your body and what's going on outside your body. The sensory neurons will eventually synapse with and send information to the interneurons. Interneurons are going to be in your brain and spinal cord, and they're going to connect neurons. So they connect a sensory neuron to a motor neuron. They're going to process information, and they're going to send messages to direct the motor neurons to tell the body what to do. And then there's motor neurons, which will carry information from the interneurons to your muscles and glands and various body parts around your body to convey information from the brain and spinal cord to those particular parts. So we have things that can sense, We have neurons that can process, then we have neurons that can communicate to the body, commands that are given by the inner neurons. And if you just look at a simple way that this would work, so here you're visualizing or sensory information that's being transmitted through the neurons in your the back of your eye to the inner neurons of your brain. Those inner neurons are processing information, and they send out the information or the command to the body through the motor neurons, and eventually the muscle tissue will contract and bring that water up so you can drink it. So this is a generic neuron, so we can kind of look at some of the parts of a neuron, and this is something you should be able to sketch and draw for testing purposes. So you want to make sure. I believe I left on the next. I believe I left on a slide that's coming up, a blank slide that you can practice this. But let me go over it with you first and talk about the different parts of it. So there are many different parts to the neuron. You can see that it does have a body. So this would be the body of the neuron right here. This is a very important part because it's going to contain things like the nucleus. It's going to contain things like cytoplasm. It'll have mitochondria, which are the little powerhouses you can see here and here. And there will be other parts. For example, there will be Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, all the parts generally necessary for cell functioning. Connected to the body will be these little things called dendrites. So all of these little parts, and the root word dendra means tree-like. All these little parts are going to receive information from other nerve cells. So those are called dendrites. Extending out of the neuron is going to be what we call an axon. So an axon is going to eventually terminate. So I'm just going to go to an axon knob right here. So that is a synaptic knob at the very end, and we talked about synaptic knobs when we do the muscular system. So we talked about how the synaptic knob has the synaptic vesicles that dump the neurotransmitters to command to the muscle to contract. So that occurs at the very end of that. Notice that these axons can branch, and there could be multiple branches, not just one branch, but you could have lots of branches that come out of this. And there could even be branches that come out of the sides as well. Around this particular axon, there are cells called Schwann cells that are wrapped around to provide insulation for the nerve cells. So you can see that they have wrapped around and created insulation. In between Schwann cells, there are nodes of Ranvier, and you can see those right there. So that's a typical nerve cell. You should know each of these parts and what each of these parts do. Going back to rabies is kind of interesting because it shows us a little bit about how nerve cells can actually work. So if the rabies virus enters into your body through a bite, the virus will replicate in the site of the bite. So if it's in a muscle tissue, that's where it will replicate itself. The virus begins to move through your peripheral nervous system, and it moves in what we call a retrograde transport. So if we take a look here, there is two types of transport. There is anterograde transport, where materials can travel down that axon to the very ends of the nerve cell to provide nutrients and signals. And then there is a retrograde transport through the axon that sends information back to the main cell of the body. So we do have retrograde and anterograde transport that occurs inside of the